Your source for everything paranormal. Para-X. The views expressed and the opinions given by the individual host and their guests do not necessarily reflect those of Para-X, its affiliates, or its sponsors.
Merry meet and merry part, bright the cheeks and warm the heart. For tread the circle thrice about, to keep unwelcome spirits out. Bide within the law you must, in perfect love and perfect trust. Mind the threefold laws you should, 3 times bad and 3 times good. These 8 words the read fulfill, and ye harm none, do what ye will.
Welcome to Stirring the Cauldron. Now, here's your host, Marla Brooks.
Hey, merry meet everybody, and welcome to Stirring the Cauldron. Now, my guest tonight is Mark Yama, and he's the author of the book, The Spirit Transcendent. Now, Mark is an associate professor of clinical psychology at the University of Idaho, as well as a licensed psychologist in practice for over 30 years. As always, chat room questions are always welcome, and if you're listening to the live show outside the chat room, come join us at paraxradionetwork.com. And Mark is here, so might as well bring you in. Mark, welcome to the show.
Why, thank you. Thank you so much. I'm glad to have you have me.
Okay. I've got so many things that we're not going to get to, but I'm going to give it hell trying. So I want to start kind of at the beginning. The Spirit Transcendent is a book that deals with exploring the extraordinary in human experience. And when you first started your clinical practice, was the word transcendent used very often in your vocabulary?
No. And that kind of leads me to a point I ought to make. So this book is, filled with transcendent experiences, spiritual experiences, given to me by my clients, psychotherapy clients. But no, I came to this very naive. In fact, my training is very empirical, very materialistic, frankly. And so I would not be talking about transcendence. And as a matter of fact, I didn't have any particular religious feelings either. So, I came in kind of like a blank slate.
That's good. Yeah, well,
yeah. I was going to say naive, but I didn't want to call myself naive. But I guess naive in a spiritual sense. But part of the training, in clinical work, I think, is to really listen to your clients and not foist your own views upon them. And I always did that. And then things began to happen through people that I saw.
Mm-hmm. Well, many readers of this book and people listening now can identify with some of those experiences that you write about in the book, and we're going to talk about some of them. And some of those who have had the same experiences that you write about may have kept themselves afraid to say anything to anybody, and they're probably going to breathe a sigh of relief that they weren't hallucinating and going crazy. So, it's a good book for that.
Yes, that is true. That is absolutely true. And I would also think that many people who go see a psychologist would generally be frightened to talk about these, you know. But I know that they can be very important, very central to a person's life. They could be a beautiful experience, something you would naturally talk about. But, it's, in a way, here I am as a psychologist, and they're going to say, now I'm going to talk about this to the psychologist. Well, then that, right there, I'm like, in a sense, the worst person to talk to about it. But it turned out entirely differently. I've had all of these people tell me about these experiences.
Yeah, and this book it's a book about spirituality. So how do you define spirituality, and do you think that each of us experiences it in our own ways?
Oh, I would say so. Yeah, I would say definitely. I would say that I think it's a very much of an individual matter. And I really think I believe that there's spirituality in religion, but you have to kind of cut to the core of it. You could be misled by all kinds of dogma, but there's something underneath. Actually, you could have a whole book or a whole research program on just showing that there is something that's spirit, or that there's a spiritual, or that the material view is incomplete. I think that's one of the biggest questions, and certainly ignored by people who are in psychology. Just about totally.
Yeah. Well, okay. So, did you have a little bit of open-mindedness all your life? About the metaphysical world, or were you just a skeptic right off the bat?
I must have. I must have in one corner of my mind an openness and a searching. I know that I did. I guess, actually, here's a story, and I don't know that this resonates with, the listeners, but, how you think sometimes, things happen for a purpose, or there's this serendipity of things that happen. And I was exposed to the idea of spiritual experience when I was really young. And now, I don't know if you know, everybody, probably most people know William James. Mm-hmm. And then some of those who know William James know that there's this wonderful book of his, The Varieties of Religious Experience. Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, I don't want to sound like a genius or anything, but I was exposed to that book when I was 13 years old. I went to a public library, my local public library, and somehow I picked this book out, and read it. It made an impression on me. Now I can't, knowing the book now, and I'll assign chapters to my students, and they can't read it. They can't read it at all, and they're college students. But I can't possibly have read the whole entire thing. But I probably gravitated towards some of the parts that had to do with there being experiences, bona fide experiences. And, in James is not casting those as pathological at all. They're part of what people experience. Not everybody experiences a spiritual experience. Not everybody has a religious experience, but he does not think of that as that's part of human ability. It's just that not everybody has it. And so, but anyway, that's now we're going back more than 50 years. In fact, I can calculate that, more than 55 years, maybe 55 years. And it might have worked on me over time. Maybe, I suppose as a psychologist, I'm allowed to say there could be an unconscious, kind of working away in my unconscious mind, without my awareness.
Well, and awareness. And awareness is a good word because, you're saying, well, maybe some people have those experiences and some don't. I kind of think, and, I'm not right either all the time, but I kind of think everybody does, but they don't necessarily realize it. So,
That could be.
Yeah.
Yeah, that could be. Also, we'll talk probably a little bit about how I got started with the people that I saw, but towards the beginning, when I met this one person, and I guess we'll have to go into her a little bit, and I call her Betty in the book, I had a spiritual experience. It blew my socks off. I couldn't believe it. It's like, whoa, what
well,
is this?
Do tell. I want more information.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I'll tell you about my experience.
Yes.
Well, let me tell you. Let me come back to for context. So the thing with this, what I found from my patients, the first person was this person who I called Betty, and she came into my office, and I'd love to come back and fill this in because I start out the book with this because it's to me it's such a charming story, and but she was impoverished, poorly educated, with like a 7th grade education. Mm-hmm. And I saw her once, ostensibly because I was going to help her with chronic pain. That was my specialty, or it is my specialty as a psychologist. And I'll tell you more about her in a moment after I tell you about my spiritual experience. But mm-hmm. we became friends. I mean, I billed for one session, and then I continued to see her for 2.5 years, maybe 80 times, and we just became friends. Kind of an unlikely pair. I'm a professor. I mean, she's got a 7th grade education, and I'll go on about that. But she would fit William James's book perfectly as somebody who James would have said, you look at her and she looks like a crazy old lady, but she was a virtuoso in the spiritual field. And I'm actually kind of paraphrasing something that William James wrote in his book, a virtuoso. She was a virtuoso. She's lifetime filled with spiritual experiences. And maybe a couple of months into my meeting with her, at that point it was weekly, I had this thing that happened to me. And you say, do tell. Mm-hmm. Would you like? I'll give you this scenario. Okay. I'm driving into work, which is about 15 miles away from my home, and I started thinking about a sci-fi book that I was reading. And I suppose the back story is that the idea was that gods could be created by men or women. Let me continue. So anyway, I'm just having these idle thoughts. You know what I mean? I'm going down the road thinking about that, and I'm thinking about God could appear in the most unlikely place. In this case, I'm thinking about Betty. She would be an unlikely example of, the manifestation of God. Then I got to be thinking, well, God could be in her, and then I'm thinking, well, God could be in me, and then I started to think, well, I could be in God. And so all of this, this thing starts percolating, which is sort of a joining, between me and God. I'm in God, God is in me, and then something starts growing, and it gets more and more intense. And then I stopped at this little coffee shop where I sometimes stop and started thinking about this, and I'd write about it, but then, so when I stopped writing, it got more intense. It's like, as soon as I'd think about it, it diminished. Then, I was sort of raised in the Catholic Church. I'm sort of an ex-Catholic, but I didn't know what to do exactly. So I decided I'd go to this church. The doors are open. I'll tell you the truth. I was becoming so overcome by this, it was hard to stay on the road. Now, nothing like this has ever happened to me before. And may I add, there's no drugs involved whatsoever. Okay. All right. So I go, I'm sitting in this church, and I'm kind of looking around, and this person comes in, does something with the host. And it's like all of a sudden I could see, it's like I was in contact with, I think some religious philosopher called it the ground of being. The isness of things. And it was, and then I had these sort of insights, that it were half in words, like that the church is blind, it's striving for something, but it's blind. But anyway, it was incredible. And in fact, it was a lot like, well, let's see, there's so many connections to this. Later on, to trying to make sense of it, I realized that what that was what in the Catholic religion is an ecstasy, and there's Catholic saints like Saint Teresa that talk about it all the time, and it's like, I had one of those, maybe not like her, but I had one of those. And the thing about it is that it's so beautiful And it really does, you really feel like a new person, like a new person, you know. Amazing stuff. And in fact, for years after that, I wished I had it again. And I was regretful that I could not have it again.
Oh, you may be able to.
I hope so. I hope so. I hope so. Boy, I'd do almost anything to get there. Now, you know what? This also sensitized me because in the book, I talk about a number of people who have had near-death experiences. They shared them with me, and that they had the same feelings and experience in their near-death experience. This sense of overwhelming beauty is just something else, you know. And then here I am, the professor, so of course I want to figure out what's going on here. And so I was reading Aldous Huxley, you know, the book, The Doors of Perception. So Aldous Huxley took, I think it was mescaline, or I can't remember. I think it was mescaline, and then he writes about his experience, you know, as it came on. And he's looking at a chair. I think he's looking at a chair, and you know, I could tell from what he wrote that he was experiencing exactly the same thing I experienced. You know, this coming into the sense of this isness of things, you know, the ground of being. And may I add a second time, I wasn't taking any drugs. I'm not taking any drugs. You know, so now that's so interesting to me because here's the experience elicited in me, an unbeliever, you know, not religious, and Huxley, who I don't know his religious feelings, but under mescaline, but it's this. And third, in my patients that tell me about their near-death experiences, it's the same thing. And so that's what is spiritual. See, that's spirit. That's, you know, that points the spiritual finger to something. It's not religious, though people may try to explain it in religious terms, as in, oh, I was seeing heaven, or I was on the God's kingdom, or something of that kind. But that's the way they're trying to explain it after the fact. So I think of it as a raw experience that's, and you know, who wouldn't want to know more about that?
Exactly.
Apparently not as many people as I would want.
Well, you got to make some new friends.
There you go. You go.
See, you're pretty much like in the middle of the metaphysical and the scientific world. And
thank you.
Was it, or maybe to some degree is it, very difficult to decipher which patients are actually having these experiences and those who might be just having a vivid imagination or perhaps need people's attention and make up stories? I mean, is there a special criteria that you use to define truth from fiction, especially since some of what you hear could be, well, and it probably has been for you, very far-fetched, even to maybe a metaphysician. So how do you define truth from fantasy?
Sure. Well, let me try to take a stab at it or talk around it, and we do have to come back to my first experience with Betty. Don't forget that we have to come back to that. Well, first off, I don't think anybody was telling me stuff because I wanted to hear it. I think that's pretty safe to put that off the table, and for a couple of reasons. See, the thing is that one of the remarkable things about seeing all these people is that nobody who came into my office knew I was interested in this stuff. You know, I mean, if I wanted to do something like a research project, I might send out a questionnaire, you know, I mean, or advertise something, you know, have you had a spiritual experience? Come and talk with me. But no, actually, I didn't mention it. And maybe now somebody knows I'm interested in it, but then nobody knew. And there was nothing in the consulting room to cue them. It's just a vanilla type consulting room, you know, professional in a pain clinic. And not only that, but when I saw people, it was for other reasons. I was doing these assessments typically. It had nothing to do with spirituality. But then what will happen is that somebody will say something, maybe about a near-death experience or something that cued me to say, oh, no, there's something spiritual here. Now, I will admit that once that happened, I started to ask more and more. Okay, but so people are I'm just doing my innocent job as a psychologist, not necessarily counseling. I do some counseling, but mostly it was assessments, which were actually very neutral about people getting approved for medical procedures, and this stuff just came up. Now, the other reason why everyone in the book, let me put it this way, I believe what they told me was their truth. Mm-hmm. I can't possibly say, to talk about whether it's real or not real is a very deep topic in itself. Mm-hmm. But I have no doubt that they saw it. Now, for example, we'll take Betty, who we'll talk about in a moment, and she had some very bizarre, unbelievable experiences. But I saw her 60, 80 times, maybe 80 times over 2.5 years. And so she would tell me something on week one, and a year later we might come back to it. And, if you have that kind of, you can tell somebody is lying because what would happen is that, what should I say? Actually, I do some forensic psychology too. I'm pretty good, I think, at telling somebody who's lying. Okay, I do a little bit of that on the side, but no, they're just recollecting what happened to them. And then a year later, Betty might come back to fill in some details, tell something from a slightly different perspective, but it's totally like she's telling me the same thing. It's just as if you went to a trip to the Grand Canyon. You're telling your friend about, I went to the Grand Canyon and I had this experience and look what I saw. And then maybe, a year later, you're telling the friend the same thing. When you might add a detail or you might say, something that you had forgotten to say, but you're talking about the same thing. Mm-hmm. So you could see that. Now, I'm only answering half of your question, and maybe you should stop me if I'm going off too far. Now, but I will just go ahead. Now, now as a psychologist, of course, I would think it's so how do you know that somebody who has a spiritual experience or say sees something isn't just simply having a hallucination? And by definition, hallucination seems real, or you wouldn't even call it a hallucination, Mm-hmm. And so that leads to maybe the kind of thing you're asking about. I don't know.
Well, I'm just throwing it out.
Okay. Well, let me answer my own question.
Yeah.
I think that first off, there's layers and layers to this. First off, I don't think that you could take an experience that other people would call a hallucination as a sign of mental illness. You have to have other kinds of criteria also, and a lot of them have to do with the person's ability to function. Mm-hmm. Okay? They're not living well. Right. But if you were to talk to any of the people that I did about their spiritual experiences, they would say when they had them or after they had them, they could live better. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I actually had a woman say that after we talked about a near-death experience of hers. She talked about it. It was just lovely. And at the end of that, she says, I think having had that happen, you could live better, mm-hmm. And Betty, too, who we're returning to time and time again, you could characterize her diagnostically, but she had everything together. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. She had warmth. She understood things. She had humor. Mm-hmm. She was, it didn't fit. It wouldn't fit the picture of mental illness. Mm-hmm. Gone on and on and on and on and on and on and on.
Let me just ask something really quick, because we're going to skip the break because we're on a roll. So. Oh,
right. That's good to hear. And with the telephone rather than Skype, too. So good.
So one of the things that I was thinking about was talking about, well, we got to talk about some of the things, the stories in your book, all right? Because that's what the book is about, pretty much. It's stories that come from the recorded interviews with your patients over the last few years. And, they run the gamut from experiences like messages from God, seeing angels. You mentioned near-death experiences, possession, all kinds of stuff. And we will get back to Betty in 1 second. But
maybe we should leave her for the end, just so people can anticipate. What is this? Who's this Betty? I want to know about Betty, but we'll just tease them. I'll just tease them by dropping this in a couple of times, and then we'll talk about it.
Why don't you just say what her chapter is called?
The Witch of Orofino.
Okay, there's the tease.
Yeah.
All right. So
and how do you think she got to be a reputation for being the witch in Orofino? Now that would be a good question for somebody to wonder.
Well, yeah, and I mean, I have my theories, but I'm going to keep shut for now, anyway. But so it's a book about all your patients. Well, not all your patients, some of them. But the thing that is really more interesting than anything else at this point is after Betty, all of a sudden here you had a regular vanilla practice for lack of anything else.
Yeah.
And so here comes Betty, and your mind gets a little jostled, it gets a little bit open, but then you have a whole bunch of new patients that you don't know. They don't know you, but they're all coming to you with metaphysical stories. Now that's
exactly right.
It's freaky, isn't it, in a way?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. In fact, it was humorous to me, too. Now, I think that there were probably about 20 different people in the book, and some of them come back because, especially towards you get to the second half of the book, and the storyline is complex. People return. They return in different forms, There's about 20. But I must have seen 50 people with stories. They just didn't make it there. And I was joking to myself, it's kind of like I would go into work and, it's like, so we get the schedule here. And I get like 3 people. One is telling me about an apparition. Somebody is talking about something impossible that happened, and others have the near-death experience. You know what I mean? And so it's like, I don't even know them. You know what I mean? And so I'm like, how come I get 3 of these on my schedule?
Did you ever stop to ask yourself why? I mean,
yes.
Yeah?
Oh, yes.
Did you answer yourself?
Oh, yes. Did I answer? I have 2 answers for you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I'll give you the vanilla materialist answer, which, and this is what, you remember we started talking about this and how you would think that somebody with a spiritual experience or who had a vision, say somebody has a vision, the last person they'd want to talk to is a psychologist doing an assessment. Yeah. Okay? So could it be that these experiences are actually rather common?
Well,
but you don't want to talk about them. You have you're afraid to talk about it, and then the last person you talk to is a psychologist. So it could be that they're out there, but they're invisible. And then for some reason, people just could see, that I was comfortable with it, or they could pick up that, as soon as they said something and I cued into it, that they had the permission. So that is the kind of thing that would fly in academia. So now on to explanation number 2. So, several people, my spiritual people, told me that they had been, directed to see me. So one of them, the fellow who's actually pretty central in the book, and I call him Richard, and he had this practice. He practiced sort of a Native American spirituality. So he had his spirit guides, telling him there was somebody at the pain clinic he needed to talk to. Now, actually, he's the one person who's not one of my patients. He's a janitor. He's a janitor at the pain clinic. Okay, and he's a friend more than became a friend more than like a patient. But so he's got his spirit guides to tell him there's somebody at the clinic you got to talk to, and then eventually he puts two and two together, and it's me. And now this is even more weird, but maybe this will help tantalize people about Betty. After I saw her maybe 5-6 sessions, you know what I mean? She peers at me with her one eye. She just has one eye. And she has this walking stick, which is literally a stick, not even a cane. She's so poor. She uses like this tree branch as a stick. Mm-hmm. And so as she's leaving the office, she starts poking it in different directions, and she says, "I've seen you before." Okay. And so, now I'm like, my memory is not that great. So this patient says to me, "I've seen you before." That typically means, "Oh, yeah, we met like a year ago and I just don't remember you." Mm-hmm. But no, she was referring to a vision that she had. Mm-hmm. And now you can take this, but actually your listeners are probably more prepared to take something like this.
Oh, very much so.
Just not throw it away. But she told me, and she was 73 when we were talking, and she said afterwards, I found out that she had this experience, another spiritual experience when she was 18, and she was with Jesus in a garden. She had a foretelling of her life, and I was in that. According to her, I was in that. Mm-hmm. I was 2 years before I was born. But then again, why would that matter, right? 2 years. Mm-hmm. If it was 5 months before she saw me, it would be just as weird. But so she told me that when she saw my name and then saw my face, it all came together. Mm-hmm. Because I was in her vision. I was in her vision, see? And then there were other people, too, who told me, things like more as an aside, like, God told me I needed to stay in the area rather than move because I needed to talk to a doctor or something like that. So that's the other explanation for this. And I don't know that I put it in the book too much because it just seems too grandiose. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. It's kind of grandiose. Like I'm not gonna set myself up, as I don't know what, some kind of psychic magnet.
Well, there is some credibility to that in my world, so don't think it's strange.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
This reminds me. Like, for example, one of the major people in my book, who's, I'm looking at my cheat sheet here because, I had to change everybody's name. She goes by Carol. She's very central in the second part of the book. This kind of thing would happen to her all the time. Mm-hmm. She was very spiritual. She had near-death experiences. She could see auras, and people would show up. Things would just show up, asking her about things that she didn't know. It's just like out of the blue. It's almost like she was, if I was slightly magnetized, she was really magnetized. Okay, I will say that. Mm-hmm. And so, there you go. That's my answer to the question. Yeah.
All right. Well, I've got another not an interesting question. It popped into my head that, how usually for clinicians and physicians, it's common for you to consult about something with a colleague if it's a case that kind of befuddles you, right? Mm-hmm. So have you ever talked to a colleague about any of these cases or referred the patient to someone else?
No.
Okay. I figured that was going to be the answer because
well,
they will tar and feather you maybe.
Well, first off, yeah. Well, actually, you know what? It's interesting. I wasn't thinking about being tarred and feathered, but yeah, there's that. How ironic, right? Like, I got patients who don't want to tell me about their spiritual experience, and my God, would I want to consult about it? I don't tell anybody else about it. So,
well, make sure nobody hears this interview. Just saying.
Oh no, the cat's out of the bag. This is a problem. Although, my colleagues at the university have been surprisingly supportive.
Yeah.
Hard to believe. Even in my chair, the dean, I had a dean read a copy of an early version of the book, and he was all over it. I was surprised, totally surprised, because I was afraid. I tell people about this, and my God, what are they going to think? But you know what I found, and maybe you know this more than me, is that you talk to a person about spiritual experiences, and after you break the ice, it's like many people have a place for that in their mind, or something has happened to them that has opened, that they're open to it. Okay, and just for completeness, now I also would not consult with somebody, because if I consulted with them, then right there, I'm making this assumption that I'm dealing with some kind of pathology and I don't know how to handle it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's not how I felt about it at all, ever. Ever.
Yeah. No, I just, it just popped into my head, that, oh, well, can you talk to somebody? You don't talk to somebody.
Yeah.
But, all right, so...
Oh, you know what? Here's another idea, too.
Yeah.
As a psychologist, and I don't know that there are any psychologists who are listening to this, but I felt like, for people who actually have hallucinations and mental illness, my openness to the spiritual gave me a kind of a leverage. So, for example, somebody has hallucinations that are maybe like the devil or whatever, and it just seems to me like, and there are other things going on that suggest mental illness. And I could go in there, and instead of just saying, well, you're having a hallucination, like, it's just, you got to take medication, I could say to him, well, actually, these experiences could be mental illness, and they couldn't, and, we could look at it, and then I kind of develop a kind of trust there. And then I think I've done good by not being so condemning of something unusual,
Yeah, I mean, I opened the floodgates when I was writing my books about ghosts of Hollywood. I would go to different locations, and I went to one that's a famous location in Hollywood, but nobody's ever written about it, in any ghosty books or anything. And I went in there and had dinner there, and one of the waiters came by, and I said, just out of curiosity, have you had any strange experiences here?
Yes.
And he looked at me really strange, and I thought, oh, I'm going to get kicked out. And he says, wait a minute. And he goes and he gets the owner. And they both come back to the table, and they said, you're asking if we have ghosts here, or it's haunted or something? I said, well, just, out of curiosity. Well, that opened the floodgates. Once people trust you and know that everything's okay, it starts to flood. So, you kind of have to open it up carefully, but once you do, it's not Pandora's box. It really works. Now, there was one thing in there, because we're talking all the different things that you have, like near-death experiences in there and all that kind of thing. But I skimmed through the book, but I came across something that kind of made me stop for a minute, and I don't know if it's Betty or not, but it was someone that passed from cancer, and then and this could be a whole show just about this thing, because it has to do with possession. She passed from cancer and then came to inhabit the consciousness of another patient of yours.
Oh yes.
I mean that's serious stuff, because possession, even though you called it benign possession, how did you deal with that? I mean, did you recognize the person? She changed her personality or something, or she was telling you something that the other one would have told you, but this one did. I mean, it's crazy.
Yes. Well, it is. It is crazy, and I'll try to wrap words around this in a short time. But actually, we could talk about this case and the ramifications for an entire hour.
I think we can do that down the line for sure.
Oh, you know what? Okay. I tell you what, if you ask, I'll do it.
If
but you have to ask.
If I build it, you will come, right? Okay.
Yeah, right. But you have to ask. Okay, well, So this does involve two people who are important in the book and who reappear throughout the second half of the book. One of them is a person I call Carol, who I saw for, I actually saw her also for about 2 years. She had cancer, metastatic cancer, and was the person who had a spiritual experience when she was 16, in her pregnancy, as a matter of fact, and then afterwards, it's like a switch went on, and she had all of these spiritual abilities. One of them was seeing auras, but she had, it just would go on and on and on and on. And living in the same town, which is a small town in eastern Washington, which I don't know if I should name or not, but maybe not name because the second person is still living. Carol passed away of cancer, was a woman who had all kinds of issues, medical issues, including some brain issues. We could go into it like, somebody would look at her case and say, oh, well, yeah, this person can have hallucinations because, we could see da-da-da-da-da, she's got this parasite that she had in her brain and so forth and so on. Okay, fine. Now, this second person, whose name I call Monica, when she was young, she had a near-death experience, which was an ecstatic one, very positive. 6 months or so, let's see, how should I put this? I had seen her, and we had been doing some psychotherapy, and then I didn't hear from her, but she called me up, and she says to me, please help me, Dr. Yama. I don't want to go to hell. Okay, well, all right, so what happened was she had another near-death experience, but it was a negative near-death experience where she felt that she was in hell, and she felt that she was being tortured by the devil. There was on this upper floor somewhere, and he was forcing people to look into the sun. Look into the sun. And it was torture. Okay, and so I'm doing psychotherapy with her in my office, you know what I mean? And I'm going, like the natural way most clinicians would go. I'm saying to her, look, Monica, what you had was a hallucination. She had all kinds of problems, mental, that put her into a coma. And you'd say, well, you're in a coma, you're naturally going to have a hallucination. That's not real. You just think that you were in hell. And so she goes on, she believes she was in hell, first off, because it was so real. Mm-hmm. But then she says, but there's more, too. I kind of build this up in the book, but the thing that really got to me is she was talking about my eyes. My eyes were so sensitive. Here she was staring at the sun, and then her eyes were sensitive. And so then in the session I'm saying, well, of course, I don't know if I don't know if I was bloviating, but, I'm just kind of, I'm listening, but I'm saying, well, of course, your eyes would seem sensitive if you had this intense imagery of looking at the sun. But then she says, no, they were sensitive. I couldn't see. And she had an ophthalmologist come in to the hospital, and she was diagnosed with sunburned eyes. Whoa, right there, that kind of stopped me. You know what I mean? So it's like, okay, yeah, how is it, this, we could talk another hour about, whether materialism can handle this kind of thing at all. And anyway, yeah, she had sunburned eyes. Okay, so she's convinced that she was in hell, and I couldn't help her rationally. I couldn't argue against it, and she just was dead set in this. And so, but then I got the idea. So she felt she asked me at one point in the interview, there was also evil kinds of things that were happening in her house, moving furniture, broken glass figurines, and visions that she had of like demons. Mm-hmm. So she's asking me in the session, can I exorcise a demon? Do I know somebody who can exorcise a demon? And then I think, I was kind of like, actually I really have affection for this woman, and we have a bond, you know what I mean? And so I could even joke with her about this very thing, because I was thinking about Carol, who lived in the same town. And she does have a history of exorcising demons. And so I said, no, I can't do it. And then I started joking, but I have just the referral.
There you go.
So I brought them together. And which is not exactly traditional psychology or psychiatry, either. But I brought them together, and they met once. And what happened was, I would love to talk about this more and more, but just to condense it, Carol passed away of her cancer. And then I was in a session with Monica, and so I broke the news to her that she died, and they had only met once, And so then she says, well, she's right here. It's like occupying this space, between us, you know what I mean? So, no, she's right here. Okay. So now, I can't help but kind of be amused by this, because it's like, okay, we got another spirit in the room, right? So I'm thinking, okay, now we're going to do psychotherapy. You got me, you got the patient, we got the spirit, right? And so I was using the spirit. And so at first I was kind of asking her, because she thought so much of Carol, what advice Carol would give her about her feelings about being in hell, but then when she told me that no, Carol was actually in the room, I said, well, what does she say? I was kind of upping the ante from what would she say to what does she say? And then for the life of me, Monica tunes in. She listens, it's like she cocks her head to one side, she listens, and she's receiving a message.
Now, see, we would not consider that possession, though.
No. I wouldn't consider it a possession. It's like she's a medium. It's like she's a medium, actually, exactly like a medium. We'll have to. Actually, I'll get to the possession part in a moment.
We've got 3 minutes.
Oh no! Oh,
I know.
Okay.
Okay. So yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Okay. So this is what happened. Monica became a conduit so that I could ask things. I could ask questions of the deceased Carol, and they were true. I could independently verify them. It boggles the mind. And by the way, as a bit of an academic, I realized that I was actually replicating something that had been done 100 years ago with Leonora Piper, who is a famous medium, who knew things that she shouldn't know. But it's like, that was a medium. This was a patient. It's incredible. So she knew things that she wouldn't ordinarily know. And it's like, that will just blow your socks off. And who wouldn't want to have, I have better evidence of the survival of the personality after death than you're ever going to get anywhere. It's just like incredible. Sorry for me for going on. But anyway, so the thing was that after that first meeting, when she had the spirit of when Monica had the spirit of Carol in the room, she didn't leave. She was with her. A couple of months later, we have another session. To my surprise, Carol is still around. She's a very upbeat, positive person, like an alternative personality inside my first patient. And she was beneficial because for the first time in I don't know how many years, Monica had suffered from depression, and her depression was lifted. It was lifted through this spiritual presence, who in this case, well, I guess it blurs these distinctions between being a conduit and a channel and then having a multiple personality on an altar. So it's like, wow. The only problem was I had a sinking feeling late at night that, did I just create a multiple personality?
That's that's the academic in you.
And that's one of the reasons why I wouldn't consult with a colleague.
There you go. All right. I should have warned you that an hour goes by really, really fast. So
it does. I'm surprised.
So you will come back and we'll really talk about a little bit more about that and Betty, because now we don't have time for Betty. Poor Betty.
That's right. That poor Betty. I'd love to talk to you about Betty.
We will do that. But in the meantime, if people want to get in touch with you, if they have a question, maybe they want an appointment or something, how can they find you?
Oh, they could find me through email. Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, I'm a professor at the University of Idaho. Mm-hmm. And it would be M as in Mark is my email is M as in Mark, Yama, YAMA, at uidaho.edu.
Okay.
That's probably the best way to reach me. And it really feels good to hear somebody's interested. So I'd welcome the email.
Okay, good. All right, we are going to go. I will get in touch with you very soon, like probably right after the show, and we'll see what we can do, about getting you back so we can just concentrate on one thing rather than, whatever.
Oh, yeah.
So I want to thank you. Okay. Thank you for joining us tonight. And
it truly was my pleasure, and I mean that sincerely.
I didn't scare you, so this is a good thing. And we've also got to thank the listeners for listening in. So until next time, everybody, blessed be, merry meet again, and good night.
This has been another edition of Stirring the Cauldron with Marla Brooks. Be sure to tune in next week at the same time for another great guest and more fun. Any rebroadcast or other use of this program without permission is strictly prohibited. Copyright 2009.
You have been listening to the Para-X Radio Network.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for listening in to Stirring the Cauldron. I just wanted to give you a quick heads up if you don't already know about the free weekly Witches Oracle deck readings that I post on my website every Monday. Now let me answer the age-old question before you ask it, which is, well, how do I know it's for me? And the answer is pretty simple. If you weren't meant to see it, you wouldn't know it was there. So if you're curious about what the week has in store for you, pop on over to marlabrooks.com every Monday and scroll down on the homepage, and there it will be.